"Sir, turn around and put your hands behind your back," the officer ordered, his voice tight with authority. I froze. What the hell was going on? I looked at the cop's partner, then over at Karen Glass, our HOA president, smirking from the sidewalk, her phone raised high to capture it all. "They're taking your car," she said smugly. I was arrested for stealing my own Rolls-Royce. My own car, the one parked right in my driveway. Karen's accusation that I was running an illegal luxury transport service. But as the officer double-checked my ID, something hit me. This wasn't about a car. It was about to get much uglier. Karen Glass wasn't just the HOA president, she was the self-appointed enforcer of every rule, no matter how ridiculous. I'd seen her around the neighborhood always, in her trademark pink pantsuit, exuding an air of authority that no one dared question. At first I figured she was just another control freak, obsessed with trivial details. But when my Rolls-Royce showed up in my driveway, that's when I became her target. Karen wasn't interested in the truth. She was interested in power. And the first time I crossed her, I felt the full force of her vindictiveness. A quiet complaint about our mailbox turned into a personal vendetta. A harmless question about a new tree in the yard escalated into demands for fines. And when my car was parked in front of my house, it was like I'd stepped into the lion's den. She wasn't just annoying, she was dangerous. She'd built her reputation on using her position to bully neighbors into submission, and she had no intention of stopping with me. I had no idea what Karen's endgame was, but I could see it clearly now. She was out for more than just rules. She wanted control, and she wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way, especially not me. When Sam and I first moved to Magnolia Ridge, it was supposed to be the escape we'd always dreamed of. The kind of place where people knew their neighbors, and the biggest conflict was deciding who would host the next block party. We were fresh off some big business wins deals that had finally turned the corner for us. After years of living in cramped city apartments, this house was our reward. A place to breathe, a place to call our own. The neighborhood was picturesque, tree-lined streets, homes with perfect lawns, and neighbors who waved from their porches. We wanted peace, and for the first few months we got it. Sam and I spent our evenings tending to the garden, sipping wine on the patio and dreaming of the future. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic life we'd left behind, but it didn't take long for the cracks to start showing. The first hint that something was off came when I noticed Karen walking up and down the block with a clipboard in hand. At first I thought she was just a dedicated neighbor helping out with some community project. But then I heard the whispers. Other neighbors talked about her obsession with perfection, how she'd fine people for their lawns being a shade of green too dark, or for having a fence that didn't meet her exact measurements. It was easy to ignore at first. A small comment here, a note left on our door there. But when the letter arrived about my car, I couldn't brush it off anymore. This wasn't a trivial infraction. This was personal. And that's when I realized Karen didn't just enforce rules, she created them to control people. If you didn't play by her standards, she found a way to make you pay. The car was the last straw. When I read the letter claiming my Rolls-Royce was an unregistered commercial vehicle, I felt my blood boil. I had worked hard for that car, and now Karen was trying to take it from me. This wasn't about bylaws, it was about power. And in that moment, I knew we were no longer living in a neighborhood. We were living under the rule of a tyrant. The first note from the HOA arrived on a Tuesday, wedged between a dog biscuit catalog and an invitation to a charity gala I had no intention of attending. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, the kind that demands attention before you even read the first word. It was from Karen Glass, the president of the HOA, and it didn't make sense at first. The letter claimed my Rolls-Royce Spectre, parked proudly in my driveway, was an unapproved commercial vehicle. I couldn't stop laughing. It was absurd. The car was registered, insured, and paid for with my own money. But as I read through the letter again, I realized this wasn't just some harmless mistake. Karen wasn't just reminding me of some trivial infraction, she was taking action. A lawsuit demanding the immediate surrender of my car. A car I owned. The tone of the letter was so formal, so legal, it made my stomach turn. This was real. I was being attacked over a car that I had earned. I picked up the phone, fully expecting to get this cleared up in minutes. But after an hour navigating the HOA's nightmare of an automated answering service, I was told I needed to address all disputes in writing with the board, and that Karen herself handled all legal matters personally. Something about her cold, robotic response sent a chill down my spine. I could feel the anxiety creeping in. It wasn't just a simple mistake anymore, it was a calculated move. And Karen had only just begun. At first, I thought the first letter from Karen was a mistake, maybe a clerical error. So I called the HOA office to clear things up. I explained the situation, offering to send over all the necessary documents, title registration, proof of ownership. but what I got in return was a cold, robotic response. All disputes must be addressed in writing to the board, the woman said. Karen Glass personally handles all legal matters. You'll be notified of your hearing date. There was no acknowledgement of any mistake, no apology, just a bureaucratic wall. She wasn't interested in resolving anything. It hit me then, this wasn't a mistake at all. Karen wasn't just following the rules, she was setting them up to control the situation, forcing me into her system of compliance. The feeling of being brushed off, ignored, and dismissed left me uneasy. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was a calculated move to trap me in a cycle where I had no real options. Karen didn't want resolution, she wanted power. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't a simple HOA dispute anymore. Karen had turned it into a game of dominance, and I was the pawn. That phone call made it clear this wasn't about fixing a mistake. This was about controlling me. Things escalated quickly after that. 2 days later, another letter arrived. This time, Karen wasn't just targeting my car. She'd added more charges, and they were even more absurd. First, there was a $5,000 fine for unapproved driveway surfacing, because apparently the tire tracks from my Spectre had left marks on the concrete. Then came a $10,000 fine for noise pollution, even though the car was electric and made less noise than a golf cart. It was comical until I realized it wasn't a joke. The final blow was a $20,000 penalty for operating a home-based business without a permit. This accusation was based entirely on the assumption that I was running some sort of luxury rideshare service with my car. The total $35 0 fines. It was clear now this wasn't about enforcing rules anymore. This was about draining me financially. Karen had crossed a line from petty complaints to outright extortion. She wasn't just accusing me of breaking rules, she was manufacturing charges to punish me, to make me pay her however she could. I was furious, but more than that, I felt powerless. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about the threat she was toying with. She wanted to break me, to force me into submission, but I wasn't about to let her win. It didn't take long for Karen to take things a step further. One evening, as Sam and I were relaxing on the patio, 2 men in cheap security uniforms appeared at the edge of our yard. They didn't have any logos, just compliance printed across their chests. I walked over to them, trying to keep my temper in check. "Can I help you?" I asked. Just observing, one of them muttered eyes, scanning the property like they were waiting for something to happen, making sure everything's in line with community guidelines. On my private property, I asked already, seeing where this was headed. "We're standing in the common area," he replied, with a shrug pointing to a strip of grass along the road. "We're allowed to be here." They stood there, arms crossed, watching us for hours. It wasn't just a violation of boundaries, it was a blatant attempt at intimidation. Karen had sent them as her personal watchdogs to make sure we understood that she was always watching. This wasn't about enforcing rules, it was about control. The feeling of being stalked, of having my every move scrutinized, was enough to make me realize something I hadn't fully accepted until then. Karen wasn't just out to find me. She was trying to destroy my peace of mind, and she would go to any lengths to do it. It all came crashing down that Saturday. I was in the garage, focused on detailing the rolls, the rhythmic motions of polishing the car, offering a rare sense of normalcy. But then, I heard sirens. When I turned around, a police car was already parked in my driveway, and an officer was walking toward me. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance," the officer said, his voice stiff and unamused. "A disturbance?" I asked, looking at him in disbelief. "I'm just washing my car." "What's the issue?" The officer glanced down at his report. Caller said there was maniacal laughing and engine revving. I had to laugh at the absurdity. My car doesn't have an engine to rev. But the officer didn't find this as amusing as I did. "For officer safety, sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back." Suddenly, the world seemed to freeze. I was being cuffed, arrested, for washing my car, for something that wasn't even a crime. Karen's false report had made its way from paper to reality, and now I was in the middle of it, powerless to stop it. The officer did a quick VIN check, and of course everything came back fine. I was released almost immediately. But the damage was done. Karen had weaponized the system, using the police to harass me and to make me feel like a criminal. I was done being passive. This wasn't just about a car anymore, it was about reclaiming control, and Karen had just pushed me too far. The tension in the room was suffocating as I stood at the front, the projector screen showing all of Karen's lies unraveling. She stood there stunned, trying to regain her composure. The HOA meeting, which had always been a dull, uneventful affair, had suddenly turned into a full-blown courtroom drama. The air was thick with anticipation. "You can't do this," Karen blurted out, her voice shaky but still dripping with arrogance. "All of this is just a misunderstanding. I've been doing my job, my duty, keeping this neighborhood in order." The crowd's murmurs grew louder as more people stood up their phones, now trained on Karen. The whispers shifted from disbelief to anger. Karen's facade was cracking, but she wasn't ready to admit defeat yet. "This is a personal attack," she spat, "a smear campaign. He's just upset about the fines." "No, Karen," I said, my voice firm. "This isn't about fines. It's about the truth you've been hiding." The room fell silent, waiting for her to respond. Her usual confidence was gone, she was losing control, and she knew it. I clicked the remote, and the next slide appeared a video clip of the so-called noise Karen had fined me for. The footage was of my Rolls gliding silently down the driveway, barely a whisper of sound. There was an audible gasp in the crowd. They had all seen the absurdity of the fines, but now they were starting to see just how deep this corruption ran. Next, I moved to the forged invoices. The audience watched as fake landscaping companies and phony maintenance contracts flashed across the screen, followed by bank statements showing the money being funneled into shell companies. The reaction was immediate angry whispers, phone cameras recording some people standing up to demand answers. Karen, one of the neighbors, shouted, "What the hell is this?" Her face turned bright red as the evidence mounted. She tried to speak to defend herself, but her words were drowned out by the growing voices of outrage. "This is a setup," she shouted, but the conviction in her voice was wavering. "I'm just doing my job. I have the right to enforce the rules." "No," I said, cutting her off. "You don't have the right to extort money from us or anyone. And now you're going to pay for it." The moment the audio recording played, the room went silent. Karen's voice echoed through the speakers, unmistakable. "We need that lot. Without his property, the whole EV spa deal falls apart." The realization hit hard. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was scheming to take my property for herself. The room shifted. Neighbors exchanged shocked looks, some with their phones raised, others whispering in disbelief. Karen's face turned pale, but she tried to fight back. "This is all a misunderstanding. I've been protecting this neighborhood," she cried, but her voice was cracking. "No one's buying it, Karen," I said, cutting her off. "The truth is out now." The crowd erupted, the anger building. Derek stood up, shaking his head. "She's been doing this to all of us. We can't let her get away with it." The support from the room was overwhelming. The HOA board members exchanged nervous glances, finally relenting. One spoke up, "Karen Glass is suspended pending an investigation into these allegations." Karen's eyes widened with panic. She backed away, but it was too late. The police arrived and she was swiftly escorted out, handcuffed. The room buzzed with relief. Karen Glass's reign of terror had ended, and Magnolia Ridge was finally free. The weeks following Karen's arrest felt like a dream. For the first time in months, the weight of anxiety that had constantly hovered over Sam and me began to lift. It wasn't just the relief of winning. It was the freedom. The peace we had been seeking when we first moved here was finally real. I spent the days after the meeting walking around the neighborhood, my mind still processing everything that had happened. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now greeted me with smiles. The streets felt alive again. People were talking, laughing, and making plans, things that had seemed impossible just a few weeks ago. It was as though Karen's grip had crushed the life out of this place, and now that she was gone, the community had finally awakened. Sam and I sat on the porch one evening, sipping wine and just watching the neighborhood shift. Kids were riding their bikes in the street again, and people were gathering for impromptu cookouts. Magnolia Ridge, the place we had moved to for peace, had transformed into something better, something real. The fear that had kept us on edge, the quiet invisible wall Karen had built, was gone. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The legal fallout came swiftly after Karen's downfall. The charges against her were severe: fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Her brother Martin, who had been the shadow figure pulling the strings, was arrested alongside her. Together, they had siphoned off hundreds of thousands of dollars from the HOA, using their positions to manipulate the community for personal gain. The courts moved quickly. The financial restitution was substantial, with a large portion of the stolen funds being recovered. The HOA board, which had been complicit in Karen's actions, was dismantled, and a new board was elected, a group of residents who had lived through Karen's abuse and were ready to rebuild the neighborhood on a foundation of transparency, trust. The old bylaws were thrown out and rewritten, focusing on fairness and community well-being rather than oppressive control. Karen and Martin pled guilty to most of the charges and were sentenced to serve time. The court also imposed heavy fines, ensuring that they would be financially ruined by their crimes. It was a bittersweet victory. Justice had been served, but it felt like it came at the expense of so many months of our lives. It wasn't just about the money or the fines. It was about restoring the balance that had been tilted for so long. The real twist came when the restitution checks were distributed not to Karen, but to the residents who had suffered most under her control. The elderly woman fined for her garden gnome, the young family forced to remove their swing set, and even Derek, who'd become our neighborhood's voice of resistance, all received compensation. It was a small but meaningful act of justice. Magnolia Ridge changed overnight. The fear and tension evaporated, replaced by a renewed sense of community. People who had kept to themselves now gathered for block parties, helped each other with projects, and enjoyed the peace we'd all fought for. For Sam and me, the relief was palpable. We adopted a dog, finally able to put the stress of the past behind us. As we sat on our porch that evening, watching the neighborhood thrive, I realized that we hadn't just defeated Karen, we had restored the heart of Magnolia Ridge. It felt like home again.